every franchise has an entry that is overlooked. For Assassin's Creed, it's Rogue. For Call of Duty, it's 3, and as you can probably guess, for Far Cry, it's Far Cry 2. The second main entry in the open-world, action blockbuster-esque first-person shooter series, it was developed by Ubisoft Montreal, who went on to produce every subsequent entry in the series, as well as Splinter Cell Conviction, Assassin's Creed 2, and Watch Dogs, to name but a few. Seriously, look at their Wikipedia. It's marked a drastic sea change in the series and to this studio itself on how it handles open-world games. Think of any Ubisoft open-world title and you can bet it uses systems and elements first implemented in Far Cry 2 and the first Assassin's Creed. However, this video is not about the greater impact that Far Cry 2 had on Ubisoft's design philosophy. It is about looking back and analysing one of the prettiest, original and undervalued shooters of the last decade, a game filled to the brim with ambition, ideas and character. Please sit back and enjoy. First of all, however, we need to go back to 2004 with the release of the first game in the series, the original Far Cry. Published by Ubisoft but developed by Crytek, famous now for their Crysis series, Far Cry 1 was developed using their brand new CryEngine, showcasing for its time incredible vistas and detail with sandy beaches, lush and dense rainforests, decrepit old ships and underground research facilities. It also implemented a design not too dissimilar to the later Crysis games, with a semi-open world, a focus on player choice for engagements, at least for the first half, and an array of vehicles for traversal. It was well received as well, with critics noting the level of detail in the environments as well as a free-flow kind of game design as a breath of fresh air for a market saturated with World War II military shooters and corridor blast mobs. In fact, 2004 is now considered one of the best years for video games ever, with the release of Half-Life 2, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, Halo 2 and Doom 3, among many others. However, the game had issues. The biggest of all was the now infamous second half, where the game shifts from realistic shooter to borderline sci-fi weirdness. It introduced new enemies who are incredibly tough to kill, and rises significantly in difficulty as a result. It also implies your character Jack Carver has almost supernatural powers by the end thanks to a mutagen. These were not really explored, however, until the later spin-off sequels / ports, Instincts and Evolution, neither of which were as well received as the original. Following the release of Far Cry, Crytek moved on to other projects, with the franchise still remaining an IP of Ubisoft. The development of a direct sequel was then handed over to Ubisoft Montreal, and in July of 2007, Far Cry 2 was announced. Far Cry 2, whilst marketed at the time as a full-blown sequel to the original game, is fittingly a far cry from the original in many aspects. It retains very few of the original features and has no returning narrative. Gone is the Ion setting and sci-fi undertones of the first game. Instead, you're thrust into a failed Central African state, ravaged by civil war and greed. Whilst the state is unnamed, it is quite noticeably inspired by the conflicts of the DRC and Sierra Leone. The tone shifted quite dramatically as well. No longer stylized as a Hollywood action film, Far Cry 2 feels gritty, dark and desperate, with each character you meet, possibly a few acting only for themselves. A realistic feel to the weapons and fire, as well as a character who's as vulnerable as they are capable, helps solidify this. Whilst the tone is dark, the setting is beautiful. Hats off to the developers for crafting such an interesting and varied world for you to explore and burn down. The Junior engine, a heavily modified version of the CryEngine, holds up extremely well, providing dynamic weather, a day and night cycle and HDR lighting. At times, the visuals are simply jaw-dropping, even today, and the environments range from rich, dense jungle to the savannah to desert. Each of these environments blends so naturally, it's as if it was stripped straight out of real life. It's seriously impressive. You play as a mercenary, hired by some unknown to hunt down and kill the Jackal, an arms dealer who has been making profit off of arming both sides of the conflict. And that's it. There is no opening cinematic as such. Instead, after you choose your character from a multicultural roster of 9, you are thrust into the back of a taxi and delivered expositional dialogue by your driver whilst you traverse to the central hub of Palas. This opening provides the player with a view of the world, not as a soldier, but as an onlooker, with a chance to see the armed checkpoint's enemy and fire system all without them being explained to you in a tutorial. It expects the player to be looking around and taking it in. A smart move on the developer's part as it feeds directly into the rest of the game's design and theme. It immerses the player in the world, it does not explain it to them. You're in Pilar for a short while, and upon arrival you come down with malaria and pass out. You awake to find the jackal leaning over you, taunting you. The man you've been sent to kill is right there, right in front of you, but you can do nothing but watch. When you come around the second time, he's gone. In his place is a city in turmoil, with open conflict happening right outside the hotel you've been holed up in. It's an unwinnable battle, and you will die. This is where the game starts. In a faction safe house outside the city, having been saved, you are introduced through the subsequent favour to the core gameplay, planning, executing, escaping, as well as to the buddies through a series of small missions. From then on, you're on your own, completing missions for both of the warring factions. The introduction is executed so brilliantly that it's kind of jarring how blurry and paper-thin the rest of the story is. There are other sections of the game similar to the intro in terms of drama, such as the battle halfway through the game ending with the map transition, as well as the ending itself, but everything in between kind of blurs together. It's as if the writers kind of had major plot points that they wanted to act out, the meetings of the Jackal, faction assassinations, etc., and then filled in the rest with general missions. Not that the missions are themselves bad or anything, but a lot of them fall into the same kind of thing. Go somewhere, kill someone, escape. Go somewhere, destroy something, escape. It's a shame too, because the voice acting is stellar. Retrospectively, you can see why. Other than the Grand Theft Auto series and Saints Row, the open world genre was relatively untouched. Far Cry 2, along with the first Assassin's Creed, were the first real forays Ubisoft made into what has become their bread and butter genre. They were still to master the style, and it shows. And in a game that urges you to explore and play how you want, it seems the designers did not want to bog you down with chosen paths, stories and characters, something they would change in later titles. It wants to be as open and expansive as possible, and while sometimes this may be a detriment to the story, it adds to the gameplay and themes in a number of ways. The base gameplay of the Far Cry series has always been plan, execute and escape. Far Cry 2 is no different. Each mission, regardless of who you take it from, will unfold in more or less the same way. Traverse to your target, usually one of the many unique locations on the map, scout it out, note down any items of interest such as medkits, ammo dumps and vehicles, and formulate a plan of attack. Will you sneak into an objective without being spotted, perhaps planting explosives on a water pump before leaving as you arrived, or use the extensive array of weaponry available to you and just blast your way in? The game will try to cater to how you want to play, and how you attack will impact the last step. If you execute your plan all guns blazing, chances are your escape will be hitch-free, as there will be no enemies to stop you. Enemies don't just spawn in after a completed objective. However, if you decide to sneak in, the escape will be a lot more arduous, with most of the objectives ending with alerting your foes. Escaping from these situations can be extremely tough. Luckily, you're not alone. As touched upon before, Far Cry 2 utilises what it calls the buddy system. These are NPCs who you will meet throughout the campaign who can aid you in two main ways. The first is offering alternate objectives to your main faction missions. The objectives are unique for each mission. For instance, early in the game you are tasked by the APR with assassinating the chief of police who is working with the UFLL. Typically he is travelling in a convoy protected by a number of armed trucks. You are asked to attack the convoy and make it messy. Shortly after receiving the mission you will get a phone call from your best buddy. They will explain that the chief's brother has a ledger with all of the shady deals that have occurred between the two parties. Acquiring this ledger will force the chief to return to the police station, and thus make him an easier target to take down. Sounds cool, right? It is, until you're realising that stopping the convoy isn't even that difficult. 2 IEDs will do the trick if you have them unlocked, and if not, grenades will. This is the way of all these subverted missions. They may earn you reputation with the buddies and unlock small bonuses for the safe houses, but for actual practical purposes, there are few that command the upwards of 20 minutes extra time required to complete. The other service that the buddies provide is something called Rescue Ready. This is where the buddy will come and save you in the case that you go down during a fight. Now, I believe this has received an unfair amount of flack over the years. People slate it as useless due to the copious amounts of health items in the game, but I would beg to differ. In situations such as this,
on your feet.
It's incredibly useful. I didn't mean to explode whilst on the ATV, but I forgot that bullets set the IEDs off. Being rescued is both useful and incredibly immersive, being dragged out of the combat by your buddy and handed a pistol to bring back the fight. It's thrilling stuff. Quite often as well, the buddy will go down, and it is in these situations that you have a choice. Either save them, overdose them on morphine, or just shoot them. If they die, they're dead. Forever. And you will not see that buddy again. It's quite an achievement for the game to have these characters feel so real. It hurts to shoot your buddy in the head, and it feels terrible just leaving them to their doom. I'm not sure why though. You shouldn't really care about these people. They're not fleshed out and don't really do much. But the game does such a great job of making you feel like a pawn in a desperate power struggle that these few friendly faces actually begin to mean something. This is a theme that the game explores quite extensively. You are not a super soldier sent in to clean up the country. You have no righteous moral high ground and no discernible backstory. You're a mercenary, a hired gun, being paid as a deniable asset by both sides in a desperate power struggle. You're in it for the money, being paid in rough-cut blood diamonds to do their dirty work, and no one can be trusted. Nowhere is truly safe. No matter what you do, how many men you kill, jobs you complete, neither side will come to a victory. You will clear out a checkpoint only to drive past it later on, topped up with militia. People have slated this as bad game design, not showing the player's progress through their actions. However, I'll be more inclined to believe that this is a stylistic choice, meant to show the player that they can't win. You can't stop this conflict no matter what. There will always be the fighting, always more men to fill the boots. It forces you to feel powerless in a game where you should be all-powerful, and this is the genius of Far Cry 2. Even the weapons play into it. Unless you get them from the vendor, any weapon acquired in the field is worn and degraded, prone to jamming in the middle of firefights, and eventually, after enough use, breaking altogether. The fact that your character is stricken with malaria doesn't help either. You're sick and will periodically come down with a fever, which you'll need to administer medicine to stop. This happens every 30 or 40 minutes real time, so about once per session playing. The medicine is acquired only through a faction known as the Underground, the one truly noble faction in the game. You will need to deliver passports to civilians caught in the crossfire in order for them to flee the country. Your reward is the medicine. This is a necessity as well, as you can die from the malaria if you leave it too long. It really pushes the message that you're vulnerable, and whilst you may be able to withstand a hail of bullets and just inject some morphine to feel better, your underlying character is weak and sick. As mentioned previously, Far Cry 2 adopted a different approach to how it handled missions. Gone was the linear narrative-driven experience of the first game, and in its place was an open world, with multiple factions for you to take work from. There are 6 in total. The 2 main story factions, UFLL and APR, the Underground, a humanitarian network run out of a church, weapons dealers, an assassination contractor, and the Buddies. Each of these factions offer different rewards upon completion, with the main faction, its progression and diamonds, the Underground is, as per mentioned earlier, medicine, the weapons dealers are guns, the buddies are reputation, and the assassins are diamonds. Each will ask you to perform different tasks, such as destroying a weapons convoy, assassinating a target, and running favours. The side missions and extra work are fun, as it provides you with extra cash and ordnance, making the main story a little easier. And whilst all the missions are structured differently, the game makes no attempt for any of the filler missions to feel particularly special. Whoever you take a mission from, the archetype of it will remain the same. Weapons dealers always want you to destroy a convoy, which will be conveniently driving in a looped course, and the main factions nearly always want a decent body count. Because of this, the game begins to feel a little tedious, with the same things being asked of you all the time. And it's a shame, because the world is begging for interesting and varied missions to be asked of you, to explore all the different areas, and not always in a state of combat. The game world is begging to be utilised by the content, but unfortunately it very rarely is. The world of Far Cry 2 is expansive. It is lucky then that you are provided with a number of vehicles in which to traverse. There are a total of 8, including the DLC, ATV and 6-wheeler. 6 of those vehicles are land-based, 1 is a boat and 1 is a hang glider. The latter is only available to my knowledge upon entering the second section of the map. Each vehicle handles different enough to make them feel like new vehicles, while still being consistent enough that there isn't one that is harder or easier to control than any other. The ATV and buggy are quick and agile, whilst the armed 4x4s and heavy-duty 6-wheeled powerhouse feel heavy and powerful. This is a very good thing, because you will spend a lot of time in vehicles, be it from a mission, to a safe house, you get the gist. A bulk of Far Cry 2 is spent behind the wheel. When watching some other videos on Far Cry 2, both modern and from when it was released, this is nearly always labelled as a bad thing. Now whilst I don't agree with that, I do believe that the way travelling works in the game is both brilliant and flawed. The problem is simply because the game requires you to do so much of the driving that it becomes less about enjoying the landscape and environments and more about grinding from A to B. The lack of fast travel, something which is quite often touted as a detriment to the experience, ties in with this as well. Whilst it feels thematically perfect in terms of gameplay and flow, it does inhibit the player to specific locations on the map, forcing them to take the same routes to and from areas, so as to avoid the various guard posts and settlements. Far Cry 2 was a game of ideas, ambition and scope, a choose-your-own-adventure take on the Far Cry mould. Unfortunately, it was done only once. Later entries were tried too hard after the success of Far Cry 3 to have a captivating and charismatic villain at the helm. Gone was the broad, realistic aesthetic of the African savannah, and in its place was a series of more and more colourful, yet unbelievable settings. It was a game of divides and conflicting design choices, grounded by the characters and story it was trying to tell. I doubt we'll ever get a game like Far Cry 2 ever again, not from Ubisoft anyway. The gaming market has expanded since then, and with that has become more demanding of things that Far Cry 2, if released today, would not be able to deliver. We can look back though, at the game that helped shape the future of Ubisoft open world titles and ultimately gaming in general with rose-tinted glasses and a 3,000 word essay. Thank you for watching.